Should I go into the differences between the ECUs?
I think they would love to hear that.
Okay. The other interesting thing, or that I find interesting, is the evolution of the ECUs from 99 to '08, where the bulk of our work is done. And so in 99 is the old cable throttle 99C2, where you're actually moving with the gas pedal, a physical cable that's opening the throttle body. A 99C2 was the first Porsche I fell in love with, and so I've owned quite a few of them of the early 996s. My race car is still a 2000 996 C2. And so it's kind of one of those models that's near and dear to my heart. But once the ECUs progress from cable throttle to drive-by-wire, that opens up a whole new level of adaptability, because now the ECU controls both the throttle, or the throttle blade, or the air that comes into the engine, and the amount of fuel, or the fuel injector pulse width, the amount of fuel that's inserted into the cylinders. And so now it can start doing load-based calculations for how much air and fuel to provide. So at that point, the pedal becomes a load request. And that's kind of what the drive-by-wire is you're telling the engine how much load you want, and then the engine, or the ECU, then can take that load, perform different calculations, and then apply that to the throttle body and the fuel injectors. Now then, this is also where we start to see closed loop come into play. And so while the ME7.2 and even the rest of world ME7.8 for the 997s and 987s, while the narrowband sensors, essentially what that gives is air-to-fuel ratios between 13.5 and 15.5. And so with 14.5 being kind of your target, or 14.7 is what's called stoichiometric value of a gasoline. So that's the actual target. And then the readings on the O2 sensors that are prior to going through the cats gives that value to the ECU, and then it can make corrections. So if you essentially change a intake modification or do something to that effect, it's going to see whether it improves it or makes it worse. It's going to see that at those O2 sensors, and then make the necessary corrections to hit its target lambda or AFR values. It has both a short-term trim and a long-term trim that allows that adaptability, with one exception. The ME7.2 ECU does not do closed loop fueling at wide open throttle. And so under your max power, where you really need it adapting the most, that model of ECU up through the 996.2 does not have that capability. So at that point, we do have to make sure that, any type of changes made are to the intakes or the throttle, whatnot, that we pay attention to that when we are doing our drive testing, and to make sure that that's, working properly, or if we need to make a few little tweaks or adjustments, we can. When we get to the ME7.8 ECUs, especially with the wideband lambda sensors, which give us, I think, down to maybe 10, all the way up to, we see it as high as we want to go, 17, 18, 19 AFR. Now we can see exactly what's happening. And the reason the air-fuel ratio, if you think about it, the best way to think of an engine is an air pump. And so the more air we're pumping through the engine, the more power we're getting out of it. And the amount of fuel is what obviously controls the combustion process, along with when the ignition fires, or the ignition timing. But out of all of that, the result is the air-to-fuel ratio. So if I know what the result is of that combustion process, then I can adapt my fueling, me being an ECU, I can adapt the fueling, or the air, or the spark timing, to make sure I'm getting that expected output. And so really the ME7.8s are very nice from that standpoint, in that they have full adaptability, and they know what's happening, they know what the output is, and they can adjust short-term trims, long-term trims. They can do closed loop fueling adjustments at wide open throttle. and they operate off of essentially an efficiency curve that we can see inside of the ECUs, and based on where in that efficiency curve it is how it picks what to use. The other interesting thing about that ECU is that it actually has two optimum timing maps for the ignition timing, and then it's got four maps that it moves between based on the efficiency that it uses to guide it. And so that's where on that day where I was trying to dial in the ECU to the max best combo for that engine, for that setup, for that day, for, on that dyno, that's why there wasn't much left to be had, because the ECUs are really good on the 987s and 997s at adapting to whatever conditions you give it and getting the best performance out of them.
You do find that pretty interesting.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. It's the stuff I loved, and what I wanted to learn and explore, and kind of one of the reasons that I started Slacker.